Good morning, and I want to welcome you today to the webinar entitled Going Dutch, Enabling Smarter Travel. I'm Deborah Fox, and I'm the Head of Demand Management at Transport for West Midlands, which is the transport arm of the West Midlands Combined Authority. We have a really exciting agenda for you today, including partners from the UK and from the Netherlands, and more of that in a moment. You are our hand-picked audience this morning to hear the first event, which is part of the knowledge sharing under our Network Resilience Live Lab. So what is a Live Lab? Well, this is a pilot project in the West Midlands with partners Birmingham City Council and Solihull Metropolitan Borough Council that is bringing operational capability to the West Midlands network regional transport coordination centre through innovation. And more on that later. So I'd like to thank the Adept Smart Places programme and Department for Transport for making this event possible. They are funding the Network Resilience Live Lab and 8 other Live Labs around the country. I would also like to thank our core partner Arcadis, who have been working with us for several months to put this exciting agenda together for you. So looking at our agenda today, you can see all the elements there. And we hope to end just after 11:25 or 11:30 when Tim Strong, Transport Innovation Director for Arcadis, will be providing some comments in wrapping up. And I really want to thank Tim and his really enterprising team for helping us to bring this agenda to you today and for working with us for several months on all the details for you. So we've got for you 3 leading organisations to share their learning today. Transport for West Midlands, that you may hear referred to as TFWM, and we'll be sharing intelligence across multiple platforms, including early findings of the Network Resilience Live Lab that I referred to. We also have the City of Amsterdam colleagues who will be leading discussions on their Innovation Centre for Digital Mobility and also enabling the shift from car ownership. And Arcadis will be sharing learnings from projects delivered in the Netherlands, including customer first initiatives designed to help incentivise behavioural change. As you'll see from the agenda, we have a couple of moments where we'll take a comfort break. That's at 10:05 or 11:05 in Central European summertime. And also, you'll see pop up on your screens 3 poll questions throughout the event. And these will be coming in between the section of presentations by each organisation. And we'll give you about 30 seconds to answer each poll question and then give you the results. So now I want to move on to some housekeeping. As you'll see on your screen, if you haven't been to a GoToWebinar before, you have a number of ways of controlling your ability to join in this webinar. I want to point out to you that we will be recording the event today, and we do hope to put it on the WMCA YouTube channel in due course. On the left, you'll see that you can mute or unmute, but we won't be raising hands today, so we won't be using that facility. However, you can raise a question for the panelists, and we really hope you do. So would you please look at the right-hand side of that panel on your screen, drop down, put your questions in, and my colleagues will be collating and grouping them for the question and answer session, which is later on this morning. So now I'd like to introduce you to the first of our speakers, and this is Anne Shaw, Director of Network Resilience at Transport for West Midlands. Anne, the floor is yours.
There we go. Thank you, Lewis, for unmuting me there, and apologies for that, everybody. Deborah, thank you for the introduction, and welcome to everybody to this webinar. I have the easy task today, and really all I'm going to do is to set the scene of what we're responsible for here in the West Midlands and some of the challenges that we're facing. So in terms of our strategic context, we have a population of about 2.5 million people. We cover 7 local authority areas, and we have a strategic plan in terms of what we want to do with transport, which is supporting both our economic outcomes for the region, supporting people into employment, and making sure that we're creating jobs and providing education opportunities for people who live and work and enjoy this region. We have a transport plan in terms of our movement for growth, and that's something that is currently being refreshed, particularly to try and tackle some of our more challenging environmental concerns, particularly around decarbonisation of the transport system, and then also looking at ways in which we can get people moving differently and more sustainably. And of course, smarter travel is part of that as well. And certainly we've also been giving a lot of consideration to what it means for us coming out of this current pandemic with COVID-19, and looking at ways in which we can accelerate and capture some of the more positive travel behaviours that we've seen happening more locally within our region as well. So more people have been taking to cycling and walking whilst they've been on restricted movement, and we want to make sure that we capture those good behaviours. So in terms of where we've gone, and making sure the economy recovers, is making sure that the transport system and is working towards that as well. So as well as having an existing policy framework that we're working to, we also have a recovery policy framework which is helping us to make sure that we're dealing with the things that we need to do to capture positive behaviours. And that's on a backdrop of an existing congestion problem. We've got something like 8.4 billion miles travelled by car within our region, and that was during 2016. And as we grow the population and as we sort of grow the demand for travel, we need to make sure that we're capturing a different way of moving. Otherwise, our region is just going to become clogged up with higher congestion rates, and that means poorer air quality, and also that sort of decarbonisation agenda is not being tackled as well. And we have something like 80% of car trips here in the region are less than 2 miles. So there's certainly definitely an opportunity for us to make sure that we can remove some of that car dependency for some of those shorter trips, and by increasing walking, cycling and some of the other smarter travel choices, then we can make sure that we're sort of tackling that as we move forward within the region. And to tackle our congestion, we have developed a congestion management plan which is built on 3 core pillars. So about increasing capacity, and you will see from our region that what we are doing is extending our public transport system. We've got programmes of improvement on our tram system, the metro, also looking at bringing in bus rapid transit system, and we'll have those on site and being delivered next year, as well as increasing capacity on our rail system as well. We also manage jointly with the DFT, the West Midlands Rail Executive, which is making sure that we're looking at improving existing stations for higher footfall, looking at ways in which we're increasing services, but also opening up new lines and building new stations on some of our rail system as well. But it's not just about improving and building additional transport capacity, it's making sure that the existing transport system that we have is operating well. So on our road network in particular, we want to work with all of our 7 local authorities and Highways England, who look after our motorway network, to make sure that we've got a road network that can carry not just car traffic but also freight and buses and cyclists as part of that. And there are ways and means in which and how we're doing that. But then we also need to think about the people. How do we manage the demand, and how do we make sure that they're sort of responding to some of the challenges that we have, and bringing in some of those more positive behaviours. So we're particularly interested in where the disruption is happening around that sort of heavy investment that we've got within our transport infrastructure, and using that as an opportunity and a catalyst for getting people to travel differently as well. And one of the things that we have been doing is developing a sort of joined up approach across a multi-agency. So all of our transport authorities, so that's bus, train and tram operators, along with our traffic authorities as well, a regional transport coordination centre. So this is a concept that we knew with all of the investment that we were having, we needed to be able to manage the system as a whole rather than individually. So we've brought together that multi-agency group of people. We have a coordination centre where all of the information is coming in, and we're able to sort of work with each of those different traffic control centres or those public transport control centres to manage the network, both in terms of where we've got planned disruptions that are coming up, but on a day-to-day operational basis as well. So as incidents occur, we're able to manage those more effectively and ensure that people know what's happening and move around as part of that. And that was opened in December last year, but it's based on 3 core pillars as well. One is we need to understand all the different programmes of activity that are set to disrupt our transport system, but then we also need to understand the performance of the network as well. But the most important part of it is making sure that the customer, the people who are trying to travel around our network, have the right information which helps them plan their journeys ahead, particularly where disruption is expected. So how do we make sure that that happens through all the different customer information channels that we have? So understanding the network, making sure that we've got that visibility in real time helps us to communicate more effectively and prepare people for some of those changes. And of course, those changes we're also using as a sort of catalyst for making sure that we can capture some more positive, sustainable behaviour by asking people to do things differently, whether it's to retime their journey so that we can use spare capacity throughout the day on the public transport system and the road network, or whether we're asking them to remode into different more sustainable journeys as well, and hopefully removing some of the reliance from cars and reducing that congestion. So in terms of building that, we've taken a lot of that time and effort to sort of work across all of those different agencies to pull out these sort of 5 to 10 year programme of activity. This is the West Midlands. These are all dots and lines where we're intending to sort of construct or improve the different transport system modes. So by understanding where all of those investments are coming, it helps us to plan and make sure that we're sort of forward thinking and putting those programs of work together so we can do that customer information and use that time to get people to do things differently. But also the operational intelligence we've built through real-time information from a whole range of different sources across all the different modes. And we can see in this dashboard how the whole network is performing. Now, this screenshot was taken last week, and actually with the current way that people are moving around this region, there isn't really very much going on. There's not much disruption, there's not much congestion. So the only congestion that we're generally seeing at the moment is where we have incidents and road traffic collisions, mainly on the highway network as well. But normally this would look very different with lots of different red lines where we've got congestion hotspots across the region, and we would normally have a number of other incidents across that top row there with the different services. And this provides us with the day-to-day operational intelligence, which means that we can sort of do that real-time customer information as well. And the data engine is probably the main part of this. So we've got lots and lots of different information sources that are coming from lots of different organisations. I like to sort of, in very simple terms, it comes into a bit of a black box where it gets sort of processed, and then that sort of feeds into the information about on that operational dashboard that you've seen previously. But it's not just about looking at it in real time as well. It's also collecting all of the information so that we're building up our historical intelligence, and it's helping us to then plan forward about what is it that we would expect to see, to do some of the modelling around expected disruption with planned programmes of work, and then helping us to understand what are the mitigation strategies that we need to employ. So what are the network improvements that we can make, but also what are the travel demand management kind of programmes dealing with people and getting them to do things differently that we can also target through that intelligence. And that takes a bit of effort, and I think Stuart Lester, who will be talking about some of the stuff that we're doing on the Adept Live will probably go into a little bit more detail about how that works. But without this sort of data and intelligence, we wouldn't be able to plan the programs of work that we have to try and capture some of those more positive, sustainable journeys. So I mentioned earlier that the customer is the really important side to this as well. So understanding the network, understanding what things are coming up to disrupt it, or what incidents are happening on that day-to-day basis. We have a lot of different mechanisms whereby we can push information out to the customer. So whether it's a multimodal journey planner, which is trying to encourage people to think you would normally travel like this, today if you traveled on this mode or at this time, you may find that that journey is easier. And then also making sure that we're capturing some of those behaviour change techniques through different channels, whether they're digital channels or some targeted travel demand management programs around that as well. And then also linked to our ticketing system as well. We have Swift is our regional travel card. It also does other things which we're developing in terms of car hire, for car sharing schemes, and also looking to link it into our cycle hire scheme. And we're currently developing a programme of trials around e-scooters as well. So how can we make sure that our Swift as our travel card is unlocking all of the different customer journey types, the modes that they can travel. And then communications through traditional sort of digital channels as well. People have got a one-stop shop to go to if they want to look at what might be disrupting their journey. And of course, the trick there is to get people to plan ahead and check for disruption as part of that as well. And then we also have contact centre services where we're able to sort of target particular customers to make sure that they're taking advantage of the kinds of products that we have, but also that they're aware of any sort of any problems that are arising from the network. And of course, through the COVID pandemic, we've used that centre to be able to push out lots of information as we've sort of demobilised the transport system, and now putting all of that back together as we emerge out of lockdown here in the UK. Communications, as I say, is really important. So how can we capture through some of the things that we have as catalysts happening on the network, some of those more positive behaviours. As I mentioned earlier, those trips with car dependency of less than 2 miles, how can we make sure that we're getting more people to walk, cycle and do other kinds of travel as part of that. And we need to make sure that we're building trust in the information that we've got. It's reliable. And that only comes with good data processing and good inputs from all the different organisations that we work with. I think I'll leave it there. I'm sure there'll be questions around that, but just to sum up, we have an existing congestion problem. We have targets around how we are tackling the environmental issues that we have here in the West Midlands, but also making sure socially we're connecting everybody within our region to the opportunities as part of our economic plan as well. So by bringing all of our different transport systems, which are managed by different organisations together in one view, we're making sure that we're able to give customers the information that they need by providing the services that they're telling us that they would like, and also by promoting services which we would like them to use, and using those digital channels to make sure that we're encouraging all of those positive behaviours. I'll hand back to Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. And that was a superb reminder of all the benefits you've delivered for residents, businesses and visitors to the West Midlands. You've done so with unparalleled vision of real clarity of purpose in such a short space of time. Now we move on to Stuart Lester, who is Data Innovation Lead in Transport for West Midlands. So if we can move forward to Stuart's slides. And Stuart, are you there?
There we go, I'm unmuted as well. You can see me and hear me, hopefully. Let's just make sure I can move on the slides as well. This is a bit weird trying to do a presentation like this. I normally use my hands loads and move around sort of thing. So if I disappear off the camera, or I'll pull the headphones out or something like that. Okay, thank you everyone for taking the time to come and attend the event today. As I thought it was worth sort of quickly touching back on some of the information about the Adept Live Labs, which Deborah's mentioned earlier. We're in the phase 3 of the Adept Smart Places research programme, which is funded by Department for Transport to the tune of about £22.9 million. And currently that consists of 8 research projects delivered by 9 local authorities. Now, Adept is an acronym, as you can see on the slide. It's the Association of Directors of Environment, Economy, Planning and Transport, bringing together a lot of this urban environment interactions and innovations that we're trying to do in order to improve placemaking for people within our local authorities. It's supported in partnership with these particular sponsors and partners demonstrated on this slide here. I won't read them out so you can see them yourselves. So I double clicked on it. I'll go back one. There we go. Sneak preview is what's coming. There we are. Got control of it again. Now, so specifically the Live Lab within the West Midlands is a partnership between Transport for West Midlands, Birmingham City Council, Solihull Borough Council, and is looking at some key corridors around the area. It's also a partnership internally within Transport for West Midlands. So it's led by our Network Resilience team, of which Deborah and Anne are part of. Anne is the director of. But I sit within our Policy, Strategy and Innovation team. And we're working with a number of our other kind of colleagues who look at different modes and really trying to spread the knowledge, the information. So it's partnership working, but across organisations, but also internally within organisations. And in particular, across the West Midlands, we've got a number of innovation projects occurring, which this is massively complementary towards, because we're looking at the data, the information, some of that data engine stuff that Anna demonstrated, and that's really a fundamental enabler for things across what's called Future Transport Zone, another DFT funded innovation space, West Midlands 5G, which is the sort of UK hub of deploying 5G technology and testing out the business models around that. And also connected autonomous vehicles is being trialled and tested in the region as well. So this kind of highways view, the data, the information is all coming together in a neat package of work that's occurring in the West Midlands across multiple partners. So in relation to the specifics in the Adept area, we've got 4 kind of key work packages. There's the fixed asset operations. So that's kind of looking at sensor deployment, and in this case, particularly focused on CCTV camera deployment. And we'll go into a bit more detail in a moment, but that's our primary kind of sensor. There's not just deployment, it's utilizing existing technology that had previously been deployed and is maximizing the value we get out of that sort of thing. The data and testing, which is the work package I lead, which probably doesn't sum it up entirely, but it's how we manage and manipulate and work with that information in lots of different ways, where we provide it to. That it feeds into that big data engine that we are utilizing across loads of different projects, both in terms of informing our operations and our strategic modeling side of things. So it's actually bringing some of the information together. In particular, it pulls in information from the third work package, which is the granular personas, which is really developing a much more detailed understanding of the people of the West Midlands, how they choose to travel. It gives us an idea not only of travel patterns, but also the kind of influences and behaviours that we can look to tap into to understand journey purpose, to influence the way that people think about their travel, so we can use it both operationally and strategically with the population. And then, of course, there's the knowledge and feedback, of which events like this are a valuable part of. This is innovation. This is some stuff's going to work, some stuff's not going to work. We want to share the learning. We want to demonstrate to other people what we've been able to do, what went well, what didn't go well, that sort of thing, and make sure that collectively across Adept, across our partner organisations, we maximise that value of learning, because there's some real good value in that. So maximising the fixed assets. So as you can see here, and as Anne mentioned earlier, we've got a regional transport coordination centre that's kind of grown out of a CCTV control centre that we have within Transport for West Midlands that looks across some parts of the highway network and also our public transport network, working with our partner organisations in Birmingham, Solihull. They deploy cameras, that sort of thing as well. They're out there, there's an operational cost to that, but there's also an opportunity to derive greater value. So there is an obvious safety usage and the real reason why they're deployed and monitoring the network that way. But from that camera images, we can start to derive a lot more information in real time that we can use in our operational, tactical kind of procedures, and also in our store the data, analyze it, and look at it in kind of our strategic planning purposes. So primarily within Adept, we're focused on camera technology. So where that's kind of deployed across the West Midlands, we've identified some key routes. So within the UK, the way we classify our roads, the motorway network is known as a strategic route network, and then off of those at the local level into the sort of the domain of the local authority highways, we've defined a key route network in the West Midlands, sometimes called the major route network across other areas in other local authorities. Those are the sort of next tier down most important routes. What we've done in the course of this project is look at where we've got existing cameras deployed, where we're looking to deploy new cameras to help fill in gaps and effectively give us a much greater coverage across the region. Within the budget, we've been able to not only look at, I think it's about 15 routes. We've expanded that recently out to around 20 key routes as well, so that we've got a much better idea of what's happening on the highway network across the region. I'm just trying to move on to the next slide. There we go. So yeah, that partnership working is a key thing around this. This particular slide demonstrates the different ways pre-COVID. We were on the right-hand side undertaken in May 2019 an Adept Open Day at WSP's offices, working with people from Solihull, working with people from Birmingham City Council, sharing the knowledge across those other Adept Live Labs, the 7 other projects, sort of, which all have kind of overlapping and complementary bits of understanding and areas that we're not necessarily working with ourselves. For example, could be things like pothole filling. There are some others around, again, travel behaviour, where we can share information using mobile network data. Lots of stuff there where we can exchange knowledge. And then more recently, on the left-hand side, you can see where we've been talking to Kent and Staffordshire, and it's got a picture of Lewis who's controlling this. So that's what he really looks like, in case he hasn't shown his face so far. So yeah, just in terms of that fixed asset deployment, one of the big things that we've been able to do and sort of really work with is we have an existing camera estate across the local authorities and within TFWM, but crucially we have also engaged with working with West Midlands Police as part of their road safety, as part of their sort of police responsibilities, monitoring crime, etc. They've got a deployment of cameras across the network that effectively has already received public subsidy and funding and is there and in place. What they're really interested in is a lot of the abnormalities of road traffic in terms of trying to monitor it for criminal activity, etc. Whereas, ironically, we're interested in what's the normality. That information that they're not interested in is really valuable to us, and this has given us a massive opportunity to work with them to ensure that we maximise in the public purse expenditure, and that data effectively that was of less interest to the police can be utilised by ourselves and our local authority partners. So as well as the police cameras, we've also been working with Birmingham City University and the data scientists there, where they have been developing some open source, or building on top of existing open source libraries for CCTV camera information detection. In this case, as you can see, some of the vehicles, working that through. That's now available on GitHub and effectively offers us, in addition to the police, another way of sharing knowledge with some of our local authority partners. Each of the local authorities are at different phases. They've got different relationships with local local partner organisations, but effectively we're able to demonstrate through the work with the police one way of working on CCTV data. Equally, we've also deploying a kind of develop it yourself and deploy it internally yourself, which is an option for certain local authorities that have those capabilities as well. So we've got a kind of a double strand going on, which enables greater learning across the local authority landscape. And then kind of what we do with the data, we've got to take into account that ultimately there is a sensitivity of privacy around cameras. There's certain, even the fact that we are working with the police, we get the data come through as hashed IDs, it's anonymized, we do get makes, models, classifications, and we are acutely aware that you can, under GDPR rules, this is still impacted by the idea of pattern of life, so you can determine movements potentially of individuals if you triangulate the data with others. With that in mind, the assurances that we've undertaken through documentation, through work with the police, developing memorandums of understanding and SLAs, we demonstrate that we ultimately are aggregating the data to the point where it's very, well, it's impossible to actually determine individual journeys. The main thing for us is that aggregation. So these kind of charts show how we are looking at things like the journeys by classification of vehicles at the top left-hand side. We look at kind of average journey time between sets of cameras, and those cameras are described in terms of their location, but the actual location isn't shared directly with anybody in order to maintain an element of secrecy around where those locations are because of their links into the likes of the police national computer. And ultimately we bring that all together, which gives us a kind of an overarching view of the traffic on the roads around the West Midlands. And this is fairly recent data, so echoing what Anne mentioned earlier, is we're getting kind of non-normal traffic patterns at the moment, hence the more inter-peak sort of bulges as opposed to the traditional AM and PM peaks that you would normally see. So this information is coming in real time. We're working with a number of cameras and steadily scaling that up as part of this project. So that's kind of what's happening on the network, gives us a real-time view, gives us an understanding of the kind of numbers and metrics around that. The sort of third work stream, the granular personas, is, as I mentioned earlier, very much looking about the people who use that network. And one of the things we're doing is looking at a lot more detail, working with the likes of Experian, with the Connected Places Catapult, who have enabled us to work with a variety of data sets taken from credit check companies, from our own kind of data that we have in relation to things like Smart Card, our Swift card it's called in the West Midlands, that's the equivalent of like London's Oyster card. Bring that information together and really develop a series of personas that we can understand the types of people in different areas around the network. So this has been augmented by some work in our future transport zone as well, so that we can build it into our strategic transport modelling. In the case of ADEPT, in particular within this live lab, we're going to utilise this for travel demand management. So taking into account that information about the coming from the cameras about flow, utilising some other third-party data sets that give us a much better idea of origin and destination on those road links. We can then match the origin destination to these granular personas and bring it together to support our travel demand management team and the behaviour change that sort of mitigates impacts on the network. So for example, if a road link is due to be closed for a period of time for some roadworks, we can look at the normal flows that go through that area, look at the types of journeys that are undertaken, the people around those journeys, and look at how we can work with them to help put in place some mitigations. And there can be a whole package of retiming, remoding that could be done there, and in particular with the current circumstances, further working from home opportunities as well. That's all driven by our understanding of at a very granular level of people. That granular level can work at zones much smaller than normal kind of statistical zone boundaries based on the richness of the data that we're pulling together. So the fourth and final strand is very much about that knowledge and feedback sort of thing. So throughout the whole kind of building of this I guess decision support, taking real-time information, looking at how we interact with people to try and influence their behaviour, and then the loop back to monitor that on the network, see where the redistribution of traffic occurs. There's a whole series of learnings we can take from that, which are grouped really into kind of 4 areas. Some of the stuff that I'm working on in particular, and what I can kind of explain in more detail, is the technical learning. So where we're working with the police, we're working with Amazon Web Services, we're working with data scientists at Birmingham City University on open source packaging, a whole raft of different sort of densely technical work that's coming out there, where we're developing papers explaining this to share through the ADEPT network. In addition to that, the second strand is the professional and career learning. So those of us working on this particular set of projects, and also with the partner organisations and through the network of partners in the Live Labs itself, everyone can develop their careers. Transport is changing fundamentally, much more real-time data, big data, different skill sets are required across transport to really take advantage of that. So this demonstrates perhaps to people in different industries who haven't thought about coming into transport that there is a lot of really cutting-edge work that can be done, particularly when you factor in the move towards 5G networks and the work with connected autonomous vehicles, micro-mobility at smaller areas. There's a lot of very kind of cutting-edge things happening across the West Midlands. The third learning phase is around the knowledge, so the sharing and dissemination side of stuff. So again, this kind of forum where we work with not just local partners, but we're in this case looking more internationally as well, understanding both what other people have done, as we'll come on to later in the day, and also being able to share what we've done and effectively make sure that people really do kind of get what's appropriate to their own local authorities, and perhaps learn from some of the mistakes made so that none of those are repeated as well. You know, it's all absolutely valuable things that are both positive and negative out of these things. Talking of that positive negative sort of stuff, the feedback loops is the fourth strand. So effectively what we're learning from this, how that feeds into the next phases of funding from DFT, understanding of what happens at a national level, reinforcing some really key things, for example, feeding into the kind of the national access point and the core reference data sets, the importance of those, bringing information together. That feedback loop helps to ensure that there's focus, funding and further innovation and research in those areas that make a big difference. So, you know, a lot of things where we talk to lots of different people, these kind of forums, we're talking to the likes of the Chartered Institute Highway Transport, we've spoken to their young professional network, demonstrating the changes that are occurring in transport, really making sure people understand the breadth of what's happening and what we're doing around that. So the kind of the final slide really is the fact that all of this kind of began pre-COVID. There was a lot of work. What's happened actually is COVID has helped accelerate the work that we were doing. We're now taking in lots of real-time information from some of those ANPR cameras, looking across all our different modes, and we're now producing dashboards that are updated daily with that information coming in real time to inform people of the monitoring on the network. So strangely enough, COVID has actually been quite positive in accelerating the work we do. Equally, it's also given us the opportunity to, thanks to DFT, to extend the deadline of this through to November 2021, which means through that accelerated work we're doing now, we'll have much greater learning that we can pass on to people in future forums. So that's it. So it's back over to Deborah, I think, then to carry on with the agenda. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Stuart. And you're a guiding light in transport for West Midlands and a real trailblazer in the Network Resilience Live Lab. Thank you so much. So I think we're on to our first poll question now. And on your screen, there's a question here for everyone to answer. And it says, when it comes to transport, are you a creature of habit? So you need to select one of these, whether you have a routine, sometimes, depends how you're feeling, or no, you're always looking to try different things. So we're just going to give you about half a minute to answer that question. So we're just coming up to the end of the half a minute, so I'm hoping you've placed your vote now. So when it comes to transport, are you a creature of habit? And the answer is sometimes. It depends on the situation and how you're feeling. Certainly many of us have had a routine severely disrupted in recent months, and are working in very different ways and bringing events like this to our audiences in a completely different way to originally intended. So in our next section, we go to our colleagues from the City of Amsterdam, and I'm really super excited to hear their presentations. First of all, we have Ruben Polderman, who's the project manager at City of Amsterdam. And Ruben, I'm hoping that you're there and you're able to take us through your presentation on digital mobility management.
Yes, hello, and welcome from a rainy Amsterdam. I actually have the rule of thumb: never take the same route back as you came. So I guess I was in the third category, always eager to try new ways of mobility. Thank you also for the presentations, Anne and Stuart. I see a lot of similarities and connections where we work on in the City of Amsterdam. Let me see. Yeah, so I'm the project lead of an innovation center for mobility management in the City of Amsterdam, together with Eduardo Green, who will join the panel discussion later. And I will share why we are doing this and what we're working on. And actually what Stuart mentioned, the COVID-19 crisis has been an accelerator for us as well, because it got even more urgent to have a good mobility management in place for safe use of the public space. So get to the next slide. Yeah. In short, some theory why the city board decided to open an innovation center for mobility management. It's because we're saying we need a mobility management of the future with the same, like the same challenges the West Midlands shared earlier. We saw some quick urbanization before the COVID crisis, with a yearly growth of 10,000 citizens. Even more jobs, and the number of visitors were prospected to double in this decade. Of course, things are different now, but we still see the scarce public space as a big issue and a responsibility for the city to manage that. And we see the from fossil to clean and the digitalization of mobility. And there we see we also do a lot of things with automatic number plate recognition cameras. But on a whole, we see in the ecosystem of mobility that a lot of mobility data is being produced, and if we can share it, we can find new ways to manage the public space. So from vehicles, but also from shared mobility, like the shared scooters or the mobility as a service providers. We start with a maze at the end of the year, and navigation systems. In the City of Amsterdam, we slides. We work on traffic management for almost a century. We had the first traffic light in 1932, and we kept on developing it in our network management system, and we work together in the region at the moment and make it more data-driven. But from this perspective, we always worked on the flow of cars and trying to minimize congestion, etc. And now in the City of Amsterdam, we have an ambitious low car agenda, where we see, well, we don't want the city focusing on cars. We don't want anyone dependent on cars to get through the city. We want new mobility options, but it also means something for our mobility management. And of course, we see with the data booming that a lot is possible coming years using the data. So we're collecting a lot of data through our assets, but also through partnerships, and we make new models and new AI models also to predict mobility streams, but also to communicate communicate traffic scenarios to mobility partners. And the big question now is, if we keep organized the way we were, we're going to optimize every mobility flow in itself: the flow of cars, the flow of bicycles, the flow of taxis, the flow boats, you name it. But how can we make use of this transition to have a look at the whole mobility system as a whole, and have a look at the city values we have for our public space. We want it to be livable, sustainable, safe, accessible for everybody. So we see we're getting towards a mobility management of the future, in which we have more insight in the characteristics of our network and our infrastructure. We have more insight in demand of the use of public space. We have more real-time insight in how mobility flows are, and we can predict how this will develop. And most important, we have digital tools to influence the use of public space, but it is in a collaborative ecosystem with city mobility providers, travelers. So new partnerships are one of the key issues we are working on. And that's why we decided we need an innovation center to work on those partnerships. A couple of examples. We're starting a project called Code the Streets. We make a digital street map where we say, well, if we look on street level, what are the KPIs for our values in how much mobility do we want, what are the demands, etc. And we have a way you also showed earlier, Stuart, and to communicate it to service providers. We're also working on ways to communicate it to all mobility providers, also the shared mobility providers. And the digital street map, that could be KPIs, just information. We rather have you not driving around the canals. We saw in the end of the last year that the amount of cars along the canals, they doubled 5 times because there were some changes in the network. And then we made some quick changes in communication with the Google Maps and the other service providers well, that they have different route advice. But that also in the future, we think we can communicate some pricing rules and other rules that way. We're legally not allowed yet, but I think we need some KPIs on street level wise to also make the fundamentals to do those kind of mobility management. We're working on a data architecture for a collective data collection for mobility data. We're requiring mobility providers to share their data also in that mobility platform. I haven't shared the architecture plate, but we have it. We have several projects in how can we have more insight in the demand of public, the use of public space. So at the moment we have a new tender for the social transport. We also are looking at what are the actual demands and how can we align public transport and other mobility options more that way. But we're also looking at the mobility as a service development. We say if that's going to be scaled up by users, how can we use it to have insight in where do we need what kind of mobility options. Real-time insights in how mobility flows are a lot of projects in this regard. We use the automatic number plate recognition cameras to always have a sight on how many taxis are on the streets. It was also really interesting during the COVID-19 period where we saw a rapid decline of number of taxis, and now we can see how it's growing on a minute basis, but we make reports on a weekly basis for our board. You see on the left down corner the same thing Stuart showed with cars, and this is the Vondelpark in Amsterdam, where we also count how busy it is with pedestrian flows, but we also can, the camera also is registering if the 1.5 meter distance is safely put. If you see it's red, then they're closer together. And we also, I saw Waze in the earlier presentation as well. We also made a feedback loop with Waze. That if there's a trigger from Waze, we see it in our traffic control center. And a lot of other examples as well. And we're looking for tools to influence the use of public space. So for taxis, we're looking at to make more geofencing options. But we're now, everyone is focusing how can we make people and businesses how can we facilitate them to make use of the public space safely. So we started the Innovation Center actually just a couple of months ago, and the official opening is only next November. So a sneak preview. We see in the goals of the Innovation Center are we need to test new forms of multimodal and digital mobility management, and we funnel it to the practice of the city and the policy and the operation of traffic management. But most importantly, maybe we facilitate innovative partnerships. We do it together with knowledge institutes, the Technical University of Delft, MIT is involved, but also other partners are being asked to join. And we also use it to showcase learnings and to scope strategic discussion on what does it mean for privacy, what are the ethical consequences in this way of working. And we do it by focusing on challenges. And in the challenge, we say, well, in a couple of months, we bring together initiatives, we take it to a next level. We think about what the architecture, the data architecture behind needs to be to play a role as a city and to organize the collaboration between mobility providers and the city. The first challenge we started last month, of course, is how can we facilitate citizens, businesses, and visitors to safely use the public space. So in the Innovation Center, we collected all the insight, all the data we have, and it were 15 to 20 dashboards and even more data sources that say something about how is the public space being used at the moment, but also what is the economic development. So we want to have a look at the MasterCard data to see, are we recovering on an economic way? What are the expenditures in the city? And we're looking at healthcare data. So this is the first one, to create that insight and to provide that information to decision makers inside the city, but also to people in Amsterdam if they want to look up. We make a dashboard. It's called Cool and Relaxed Places. So there we have data on how busy everything is, combined with a model and data from the University of Wageningen, how hot and cool different places in Amsterdam are. Sometimes that differs in 15 degrees of Celsius. And the second challenge we want to start at the end of the year is about how can we manage shared mobility and mobility as a service, and what's the role of the city in that ecosystem. So all brand new, and happy to meet you and also learn about your learnings and the way you organize it.
Thank you so much, Ruben. That was really, really fascinating. And I was so interested in the international examples to learn from, as well as your own. And perhaps we will come and see you at your Innovation Center when it's open.
That would be great if we can meet in person again. Yeah, the invitation is out.
Oh, that's lovely. And I understand that Eduardo Green is going to be standing in for you for the question and answer session later this morning. And I would like to remind everybody that you can pose your questions to the panelists by clicking on the little pop-out box to the right of your screen, or that's where I can see it. Pop your questions in and send those across, and my colleagues will be collating them and grouping them to go through later. So thank you so much, Rob. So now we're going to hear from Marek Kruszel, and Marek is the Mobility Program Manager in City of Amsterdam. Marek, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, cool. Well, this is the first time I do a presentation for public I cannot actually see. So that's a new experience. I'm controlling the slides right now, but it's, can I go back as well?
Yes, I think you can go back with your backward arrow on your keyboard.
Yes, sorry about that. Right, so good morning. Thank you, Transport for West Midlands for having me, and Arcadis as well. Of course, and Stuart and Ruben for the presentation so far. So yeah, my name is Marek Kruszel. I work in the smart mobility field at the innovation team of the City of Amsterdam. And recently I joined the Zuidas district team to help them improve the accessibility of the area by implementing new mobility concepts such as shared mobility and of course MaaS. And in this presentation, I will tell you something more about the latter. So I'll tell you something about Amsterdam and the Zuidas, which means southern axis of Amsterdam. I'll introduce the rationale behind the nationwide MaaS initiative in the Netherlands, started by the ministry, and the place the Zuidas takes in that framework. So given the fact that the Zuidas is a large business district, I will also go into more detail on how we incorporated the business firms into our MaaS plans. And I will end with some insights in the MaaS service and why we, and we'll try to explain the impact of COVID-19 that has on the MaaS Zuidas. Yes, so. The Zuidas, let's start by having a look at the area. So Zuidas means southern axis of Amsterdam. It's in the south of the city. It's the business hotspot of the city with big offices like ABN AMRO, Arcadis, Cushman & Wakefield, and lots of big law firms. It's also close to Schiphol Airport, and it has its own large train station. Which has a growing number of travelers, expected to be 250,000 travelers a day in a few years. The area is actually intersected by the peripheral motorway around the city, and is thus split in two parts. Yeah, so it's part of the Amsterdam metropolitan area, which is facing a large increase in inhabitants, but also jobs, tourists, and traffic. That's of course a trend that can be seen in all larger metropolitan areas in the world. In the next 20 years, it's predicted that it grows in 200,000 inhabitants, 9 million extra tourists, 88,000 extra jobs, and a 40% increase in traffic. So we are building also more and more home residences at Zuidas, not only business. So in order to create a livable and vibrant area, because it's split in two parts, it's necessary to redesign the rail and car infrastructure that is currently running right through the area. So a massive infrastructural project called Zuidasdok is getting started right now. And it's going to reshuffle tracks and motorways, and it will eventually lead to the situation that rail infra is doubled and is situated on top of the motorway tracks. But given the fact the public space is limited to reshuffle all this traffic without causing extra delay and hinder for the people traveling to and from the Zuidas, a mobility management program is developed, and the program must lead to spreading traffic in time for less peak hour usage, and also promote alternative modes of traveling. So at the time we are setting up this mobility management program, and at the same time the Ministry of Infrastructure started with their initiative to support 7 different MaaS pilots in the Netherlands, of which Zuidas is one. And each of these pilots has a different focus. So in Maastricht, in the south of the Netherlands and the border with Belgium, it has a focus on crossing the border with MaaS. There's also a lot of MaaS serving rural communities, MaaS for new large urban areas, like in Utrecht, another big city in the Netherlands. And MaaS supporting firms, business firms in an area like the Zuidas in Amsterdam, to make more use of alternative modes of transportation and to make traveling from and to work more flexible. And with the MaaS services, we want people to plan, reserve, travel, and pay for their complete trip with one single device and one single app. So multiple options should be part of the MaaS proposition, including taxi and ride-hailing services, your own modalities, shared cars, bikes, etc. So the ministry, together with input from mobility companies, is developing the conceptual framework and technical standards in order to create a MaaS ecosystem that's safeguarding a level playing field for parties that take part in the pilots. A part of it is also the TOMP API, which provides like the technical standard for every mobility company to join the MaaS platform. But is the government the only responsible party to act in order to prevent gridlocks like the one you can see in the picture? Well, the answer, of course, is no. With large firms at the Zuidas, it's clear that they and their employees need to act as well. And a number of these large firms, of which Arcadis is actually one, agree to becoming launching customers of the MaaS Amaze app. So they are willing to embrace the MaaS proposition, as this proposition will make life easier for them as well. If the MaaS app will cater for split billing and CO2 registration for all of the businesses or commercial trips, this of course will ease the administrative processes which are linked with this. But that doesn't mean that we shifted away from the user-centric approach that is needed to actually let MaaS become a great success. But do we know that user? Well, in 2018, we started the so-called Zuidas Mobility Experience to get a better insight in motives, characteristics, and behavioral aspects of travelers and workers at the Zuidas. So the goal was to get insight in user requirements, what are the missing links, and how can MaaS fill in these gaps. So we defined different user groups, and during a month we provided a mobility budget to them, to the participants, to use all mobility options at hand, including shared mobility. And in-depth interviews and large-scale questionnaires were part of the study to get these insights. And the outcome of the outcome of the Zuidas Mobility Experience, it says something in the slide. 85% of the participants actually tried new mobility options, which is a lot, I think. 2 out of 3 are willing to use flexible options, they do that more often than they used to. But adopting a MaaS, of course, is not easy. You can read a number of obstacles here on the slide. We are creatures of habit, of course, and it has to be very easy to use the new technology. There are other obstacles like geofencing. So not in all areas the coverage of shared mobility options, for example, is as good. User experience is key, and the employer, if the employer is adopting the new approach, that's of course very, very helpful. The outcome of the study provided input for the tendering guidelines and design contest for the MaaS the MaaS procurement for the Zuidas. It was actually a contest. The goals we set was more users of mobility as a service, better user satisfaction, less use of the car, and more use of shared mobility, bike and public transportation. So we started the procurement, and the Amaze consortium, of which Arcadis is actually a part as the owner of Overmorgen, which is a Dutch mobility company. They won the contest, and they are now working on incorporating all types of shared and non-shared mobility options in their app, in their service. So at the moment we are testing the first prototype of the app, and we are planning to go live with a closed limited user group this September. And if we're lucky, we'll make December to go live into the App Store. So with this multimodal traveling app, also the billing options should be very easy. So that employees of the companies Zuidas can make a declaration for their travel costs easier. So we are looking forward to that moment. But does everyone live happily ever after? We'll see about that. Actually, there are. Yes, there are opportunities we have to look at. Of course, the pilot will or has to lead to happy travelers and will boost mobility innovation. And it has to lead to a healthy competition between mass service providers and shared mobility operators. But there's also threats. It's necessary to have symmetry or an equal level playing field on the data component. So it's really necessary to run and optimize a system like this, and it should be available to everyone, to all the companies. So will we truly create an open market and provide choices to all travelers? So that's an important thing, to have a lot of choices for the users and prevent a monopolization and commercialization of the public space. But also now COVID-19 has disrupted this process of travel behavior. But public transport is now at this moment no longer the backbone of the system, because people are well afraid to use public transportation. So maybe shared mobility can fill in this gap. We all have discovered also that working from home is actually possible. So that's also kind of a mobility option that comes into place. For MAAS, this means that the concept might need to be expanded with additional features to cope with, because of course the flexible nature of the MAAS concept should fit the so-called new normal situation. So in conclusion, what we are going to find out in the coming 2 years that the pilot is happening is whether or not we can make this all work for the benefits of all stakeholders involved. So all the mass service providers, transport supply operators, users, the government, but also the Zuidas business firms, of course. The ministry has designed an extensive monitoring and evaluation process for all the 7 pilots, and we will hope that will provide the answers to these questions. And I'd be glad to inform you later on when we have some first findings. So thank you a lot for listening.
Thank you so much, Marek. And I particularly found interesting your user-centric approach. And we're really interested to learn from you because it feels like you're 1 or 2 years ahead of the West Midlands and our Network Resilience Live Lab. And so we really look forward to seeing your app go live into the App Store in December and learning from you more. Thank you so much. Right, so now we move on to the second poll. And I'm hoping that you will see on your screen very, very shortly the second poll question. So what would encourage you to use an alternative means of travel to a private vehicle? This obviously makes an assumption that you have a private vehicle, but what would encourage you to use an alternative means of travel to a private vehicle? And again, we're just going to give you about half a minute to answer that question, and then the answer to the poll question will come up. Right, so the poll is just closing now. And what would encourage you? Safer walking and cycling infrastructure. Well, that is reassuring with the government's investment coming soon on the emergency active travel measures, of which we've been successful in securing monies in the West Midlands. I think we can move on to Eric Verschoor now, who is the Smart Mobility Technical Director for Arcadis Netherlands. I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentation today, Eric. Eric, I think you're on mute at the moment, so we'll see if we can rectify that quickly.
Yeah, seems to be unmuted by the organizer. So yeah, thank you for your introduction. And I think we are where we stopped before the break with the consumer at the central point. I'm taking over also, but from a road widening and roadworks perspective on the Dutch minder hinder guidelines. I personally have a background in traffic management and have had a role as traffic manager in several road widening projects. But in 2009, almost 11 years ago, I was one of the authors of the Dutch what they called minder hinder or less nuisance guidelines to minimize the disruptions of roadworks. This has a background in an ambitious plan from the Minister of Transport with large investments in infrastructure, especially road widening projects after the economic turndowns in 2008 and before, to tackle structural congestions on the motorway network, especially in the western part in the Netherlands, but also to stimulate the economy on the other hand. One of the biggest challenges was the potential traffic nuisance resulting from all those simultaneous roadwork projects. And in order to prevent projects being postponed or being delayed due these traffic nuisance through the roadworks, managing the consumer expectation, but also managing the politics was a really important topic to roll out those infrastructure projects. And it was not only a project approach for roadworks, it was simultaneously a project almost to manage and change the culture within the Dutch Highway Agency, which was originally more an asset manager, an engineering company, focusing on the assets, on the techniques, and not so on the clients. So that was the shift we tried to make almost 10 years ago with the design of the Minder Hinder guidelines, where we try to really make a cultural change and get an eye on the perception of nuisance to roadworks. Well, it's not only to reduce the congestion due roadworks, but especially also the perception by the road user, and in the end also the politics. Oh, that's going too fast. The guidelines consists two parts, two documents, where one is focusing on progress and organizational part, how to manage this within the projects, within the organization of the Dutch Highway Organization. And a second part, and that will take on from now, consists 7 pillars, which more tackling the content. The first of them is the smart planning pillar. Which was really focusing on the planning of the roadworks. It focused on the planning of the roadwork itself, especially focusing in summer periods or especially at night, what is best for projects, but also on the coordination with other projects within the country and also the region. For example, it has been decided to bundle the works on the major A2 motorway in the Netherlands from Amsterdam in the northwest to Maastricht in the southeast in a few years instead of spreading it over multiple years. But if you do that, you have also to put some extra focus on preventing conflicts, on detours, on other network links, and also the public transport system. So really, it's moving fast. From planning smart, it's also important to plan your construction work smart. Which kind of road phasing is the best, and maybe with a little bit more investments in the techniques being used for the construction, a lot of nuisances can be minimized. So this pillar is really aiming on challenging contractors to limit traffic nuisances at the source and also maximize the innovation and knowledge of the contractor. So traffic nuisance plays an important role from 10 years ago until now in the tendering procedure and bid evaluation. And I think then it's getting more interesting for today, and our audience today also is the third pillar. That's on transportation demand management. I saw it also on earlier slides. This is really on real-time, remote rerouting or remove traffic from the road by using communication and creating awareness through different channels. Not only but also providing alternatives like reduced public transport, enhanced parking location at stations, offering rental bikes for the post public transport last mile solutions. Especially a new one, and that's where Rob is going to talk about, is also offering frequent road users financial incentives to stay out of the rush hour. That is really transportation demand management, and it's quite important there where other parts of the Minder Hinder approach, contractors were really asked to participate. This was the part where the government played a central role, and we didn't hand over this responsibility to the contractors. The fourth one is traffic management, which is really a collaboration between the contractor and the road manager, where we challenge the contractor to optimize the flow within the contractual boundaries from the roadworks, but also working together with all road authorities to adapt smart network management strategies, and where necessary, adding additional systems to optimize the traffic and incident management process. As also mentioned in the presentation before, it's not only on the tool set, the equipment you use, it's also about the monitoring. So it all comes with some operational excellence, where you're really focusing on short cycle evaluation, on travel time development, but also traffic safety development, and also focusing on incident response to even enhance the procedures to limit it, the nuisance for the road users. So really not the road manager, but also the road work, or the project team responsible for the roadworks, got more a central role in this evaluation and enhancement process. The fifth pillar is all about communication. It's about sharing reliable planning details, telling road users what's going to happen, how it will be impacted, but also help with storytelling. Why does this take so long? Or what are we going to do? Or what did we last weekend to serve you this new road layout? And especially over the last 5 years, we see also new solutions by using apps to really reach out to our road user. While driving, you only have 4 seconds to tell a story on a sign. Now we can people, when they stop driving and they have passed a geofence, we can then send a message and invite them to click a link, or warn them for weekend closures, like that. And there you have push messages, but also advertisements on social media, Facebook, based off geofence advertisements is really coming up in this pillar in the Netherlands. Then, and I think the sixth one is really important, is from solutions a simple one, but this is really having eye on the typical irritations from road users during roadworks. Think about roadworks where lanes are closed over long distances, or roadworks are not visible. Those are typically topics mentioned in roadworks evaluation as negative scores. So really tell what's happening, but also challenge contractors to reopen a lane if possible. Look at the quality of road markings, the quality of signing. Well, we're having a detour, only one missing sign could be really an issue for a road user. The focus was already at the management level on preventing on runoff of night works within the Rijkswaterstaat, the highway agency, but also at contractors. So for this purpose, there was really a high-level management dashboard. Overall projects were monitored, but also they had several audits by staff from the road authority itself. But we also sent out road users, normal road users, students, to look through the eye of a normal road user. And sometimes they come up with different observations where the specialists don't even see those minor details. So here it's really the devil is in the detail, but those issues are mostly also not the most expensive to solve. It's really on focusing and also train the contractor, but also the staff from the road authority itself on consumer behavior. Then it's not for free, this approach. It's costing, depending from the project, the area, where you work, it's on top of the project from 2 to 20%. The 20% is an extreme one. Bridge renovation in one of the most important network links in the Netherlands. But it's really on the agenda also when we start a new roadwork project to discuss what is necessary, which budgets to manage the road user expectation and manage the traffic flows. Especially the A12 cases will also be a part of Rob, his presentation on Spitsmuiden. And we also included in the project preparation on several checks and balances from the first scope definition phase throughout the evaluation of a project. Project team has to hand over several documents where they show they're in control in the preparation phase, also share their learnings. And during a reconstruction phase, they mostly also have their own management dashboard looking at road user satisfaction, congestion development, but also travel time, reliability, and also the effectiveness on their measures they take to take road users from the rush hours. So this approach is now over for almost 10 years. Looking back, I'm waiting for the, yeah, there's a little delay in the shifting for me. The results were really positive. We had no political or administrative issues during those what they called spoedwet large reconstruction projects between 2010 and 2012. We had a limited increase in traffic jams, and we had really good scores in the road user satisfaction. But also, after all those road widening projects, the focus shifted a little bit away at top level, at management level, but on the other side, it was almost business as usual within the projects, not only at the highway agency level, but also for the larger governments, and also contractors started as a standard part of their approach. Now, 10 years later, we're working on the update. While in the Netherlands, we expect the next wave of major roadworks. This is partly driven by major maintenance and renovation projects of aging bridges, but also maintenance of tunnels to ensure the compliance with the EU tunnel legislation, and also new road widening projects. What's central in the update? We're really planning a program from a regional level to a national level, including also more the rail project. Well, that was what we learned over the last years, especially the rail sector is planning ahead 5 to 10 years, and the roads sector was planning ahead 1 to 2 years. And once the rail planning was already fixed, it was really hard to change it. But we're also planning more on the network effects, especially looking at the bridges. What will be the impact if we have an asset failure on a network link? We have to take in account the economic effects on that, and that's taking into account also in the planning. Then it's quite important that we also think not only on short-term measures, but also more on lasting measures. Well, roadwork projects, especially the ones I showed also, they're really good in taking people for a few months, even almost a year, to change their traffic behavior. But after the roadwork were finished, there were extra lanes, so the traffic jams were gone. Everyone got back to the old routine. And what's now in the new update is how can we make more sustainable, lasting impact. And we really want to work together also more with also secondary road authorities in the planning of the measures, including new financing models between the different government layers, but also more with businesses and stakeholders to make it not only a governmental approach, but also include other parties. So that's really, in a few steps, the Dutch approach to really take the consumer first at roadworks. And yeah, I'm looking forward to ask any questions later on during the panel session. So please put them in the Q&A box.
Thank you so much, Eric. And the perception of disruption and motorist frustration is a really interesting topic. And certainly we're familiar with multiple roadworks in the West Midlands and really want to learn more from your experience. So thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. And there's a reminder for all of you to put your questions into the chat. And we'll be looking at the questions very, very shortly. But we have one more speaker for you today. And that is Rob Morris, who is from Arcadis Netherlands, and talking about incentivizing behavior change.
Well, Deborah, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Correct, my name is Rob Maurits. I'm a senior consultant at Arcadis in the Netherlands. I work in the field of smart and sustainable mobility for almost 14 years now. I carried out various consultancy work for several governments, but my specialty are the many incentive projects we already talked about. Also called rush hour avoidance, if you translate it from Dutch. And in Dutch, we call it spitsmijden. So I'm asked to tell you something more about this concept and these projects we had in the Netherlands. I will first start what the concept is in short. If you simply said it's the opposite of road pricing. People, they get paid temporarily instead of having to pay. So we use carrots instead of sticks. The motorists who are driving during our highways, during peak hours, we catch them with our ANPR cameras. I don't know if everyone knows what it is. It's the automatic number plate recognition where we earlier talked about. And the people who drive there frequently, we offer them participation in a project, and they can earn money when they stay away from the peak hours at the project. And what do they have to do? They can earn the money to stay away from the road, and they can do this in several ways. So yeah, as we now all doing with COVID, we're working at home. But most of the people, they choose to drive along another route, or they try to drive still by car, but off peak hours. And a less group of the participants, they use another mode of transportation by carpooling or bike, or use public transportation, but it's a small group. Well, what we see with this project is that they work at best when when they feel the pain of the traffic jams. So therefore, the concept works at best during major roadworks, as Eric already told about, and in strong congested areas. So when you feel the pain, then you need to change your behavior. Let me tell you something more about the history of this project, because this concept is already proven in almost 30 projects all over the country. So we started with 2 experiments on the A12 motorway between The Hague and Zoetermeer. It was a long time ago, in 2005. And the pilots, they turned to be a success, so they were rolled out all over the country. There was also a short period where we had a connection with our former national congestion charge program, and they wanted to experiment with incentives and to discover the technical aspects. For example, how does it work when you install onboard units, or how does the usage of ANPR work? So it was very experimental. But the national congestion charge was stopped in 2010. And so these projects, these SplitSmarter projects, they went over to a new program. It was called Optimizing Use. That was a big transport demand management program in the Netherlands, and we still have 2 projects running at this moment, one in Groningen, that's in the north of the Netherlands, and one in the east of the Netherlands, in Nijmegen. So we come along from a long period of using this concept. Well, let me tell you something more about how this concept works. We start, as I already told, with the use of ANPR data. So we, during working days, between 6 to 10 weeks, we measure the amount of traffic to identify the motorists who drive frequently on and to set up a baseline. And after these weeks, then we post letters and we invite the frequent motorists to participate in this project. And we're doing this by internet, and we're showing them their individual maximum, what they can monthly earn when they adapt their travel behavior. For example, that can be 170 euros per month. So it's not a great amount of money, but it's still enough to get a traffic behavior change. Well, when people want to, so it's voluntary. Then they can register on the internet, and then the project starts. And we still use the ANPR technology to register the plates, but only of the participants of this project. And sometimes we also use an app and use GPS tracks to measure if they drive or not during peak hours. And if they don't drive during peak hours anymore, then they can earn 3 till 4 euros each time they don't travel anymore during the peak hours. And this is relative to their what we call the baseline. So they don't get paid for the times they already skipped the peak hours during this baseline period, the period of 6 to 10 weeks before the project starts. So what are our key impacts at this moment? What we see is from all of the people we invite, 25 till 30% of the people, they participate. So that is a great amount of people who want to join. And if they join the project, we see that they reduce their peak hour travel journeys by 40 till 55% in comparison to their former travel behavior, the so-called baseline. And you can, it's similar this effect, maybe you recognize this from vacation period. You get a small reduction of the traffic demand, let's say 3 to 5%, gives us a relatively larger effect on the traffic flow. So we see 10 to 15% less travel time lost of the vehicles on the former motorway frequencies. But this effect is not temporarily. Even when we stop with the rewarding, we see that after 3 till 6 months, most of the people still change their behavior by 50 to 80%. So that's a big step to changing travel behavior in the Netherlands. And this effect is also a very positive influence on the roadway agencies, because they get a positive opinion because the road users are satisfied by these projects. In short, the visuals of our impacts. At the left side, you see what most participants choose when they join the project. And as I already told, the time shift is most popular. And in the right figures, you can see what the effect of the time shift is. On the left figure, you see the normal frequency of the traffic during the morning peak, and on the right side you can see during the project 2 smaller peaks, one before 6 o'clock and one after 10 o'clock, and you can see above that overall 3 till 5% of our maximum capacity is free at this moment. So you can see the effect of the people who change their behavior in the right figure. But what are the reward options? Because I already told you about the cash option. This is the most effective one. An amount of 4 till 3 euros is enough to change the behavior. But there are also some other options you can see on the sheet. And during the Optimizing Use program, we also had many projects where we used points instead of money. And participants could change their points in a web shop, for example, to get a film or dining tickets or other coupons. But cash is the most effective one. And if I could recommend it, I should use the cash option. But it is not only the positive things all about Spitsmeider. There are also some key issues where I want to tell something more about it. One of the things is most people say you reward the wrong ones. You should reward all the people who already drive outside peak hours or who are in the public transport. You reward the bad behavior. So why are you doing this? But what we say, it's all about to change the behavior, and you want to nudge those people who didn't change their behavior anymore. So that's exactly the point we want to achieve with a temporary Spitsmeider project. There's another thing about the Spitsmeider project. It depends on the routes who are allowed where you can drive to earn money, because you don't want your traffic on routes where you can't have a heavy traffic. So you have to think about this when you set up your project. But there are now 3 other aspects I want to zoom into, and the first one is the fraud prevention, because there are a few options to fraud or to bypass the terms of the project. And you can buy, for example, a new car and not reporting this. So we can't see with the ANPR camera if you bought a new car. The same thing you can do to change your car with an acquaintance or with a relative. And 2 things who are not allowed in the terms of our projects are when you getting a new job or moving out, then you have to report this. And if you don't do this, you will also get rewarded for removing to another part of the country. So that's not that's what we want. And the same for long-time illness and maternity leave. It's also not allowed. You have to report this, and if you don't do this, then you get rewarded for something you don't earn. So we monthly check the license plates of our participants together with the data of our DVLA. And we also perform data analysis to detect strange behavior, what could be a good sign, but would also indicate that the fraud options or the bypassing of the terms. Let me tell you something more about the technical choices we can make. There are roughly 3 technical options to measure the travel behavior. I already told you about the ANPR. There are also 2 other options with GPS, and the one is the smartphone, and another one, but that isn't used anymore. That was only in the part when we had the natural congestion charts we wanted to experiment with, were the onboard units. Well, each of them have their own pros and cons, as you can read on the sheet. But most projects use ANPR technology to measure the baseline before the project starts. And during the project, most of the Spitsmeider projects still use ANPR technology, but most times in combination with an app and GPS to define the degree of adaptation of the travel behavior. Well, something came along in the earlier presentations. What about the protection of our personal data? Because all this data is very important for our projects, but is it allowed to use these data? Well, you have to find the legal basis for processing this data in the GDPR. That's the General Data Protection Regulations. And according to this regulation, a license plate number is personal data. So in the Netherlands, we have a special national legislation above the GDPR, which gives road authorities the opportunity to register these license plates without consent of the user. And that's really necessary because you have to have a legal base to register those license plates, because you don't have the consent before you make a picture of the license plate. In the project, then we shift to a legal base when we use the consent of the participant. But before, you have to use our special national legislation. But there's one thing: you can't use this data for other purposes, because the legal basis is only for Spitsmyde projects. And these projects are also, it's necessary that there must be major roadworks. Otherwise, we can't use ANPR data in the Netherlands for Spitsmyde. So this is what we make in this national legislation, that we are allowed to use this data. Well, I'm at the end at my presentation. I hope I inspired you all with this concept. Maybe it's a point where we can set in this concept in another country than the Netherlands. I'm looking forward to answering your questions in the panel session, and please put them in the Q&A box.
Thank you so much, Rob. And I've learnt a lot from your presentation about incentivizing behaviour change. And this is certainly an interesting and polarizing debate in the United Kingdom. So thank you so much. And here in the West Midlands in Coventry, there is a mobility credit scheme just starting. And so it would be really interesting to learn from that and compare results with you. So I think we now come on to the final poll question, and this will be coming up on your screen. So you know the drill. You'll have 30 seconds to answer the question. And the question is, how do you feel about data sharing in travel apps? And that includes sat-nav, but also mapping apps. So a lot of the things that we've heard about today. How do you feel about data sharing in travel apps? And we're just going to give you half a minute, and then we'll come to the answer. Thank you. Okay. You have no concerns. Well, that's certainly very interesting for us here in the West Midlands in terms of how we roll out our solutions at the end of the Network Resilience Live Lab. So that's really, really interesting. Thank you so much. And now we're going to move on to the question and answer session. And this is going to be between our panelists. So panelists, you may reveal yourselves so that people can see you. And just as a reminder, Eduardo Green is going to be standing in for Ruben Polderman. So I can see Eric and Rob. Eduardo, very welcome, and Marek as well. So I'm going to start with the facilitator's prerogative and ask everyone a question. And earlier we heard that Ruben say that big change is possible in coming years. And so what big change in smarter travel do you think is coming, please? And I'd like all of the panelists to answer, starting with Rob.
Oh, could you repeat the question? Sorry.
So what big change in smarter travel do you think is coming?
I think there will be a lot of data-driven technology, what could gives us a lot of extra information about the customer. So I think that will be the biggest step, to use this data and to assure we can make better measures, to make traffic flows better, and also a multi-model system will help this all this data to improve this.
Thank you, Rob. What about you, Eric? What big change do you think is coming?
Add on to what Rob already said, I think we're really moving away from roadside measures to smart solutions, apps, digital ways to communicate, and also having more focus on really cooperation between projects, governments. The road user drives from point A to B and doesn't cope on boundaries from road authorities. So really cooperation is the second one.
Thank you so much. And those administrative boundaries are much less important to our customers than to ourselves, certainly. Eduardo, what do you think is the next big thing in smarter travel?
Yes, very good question. Ruben was mentioning in his presentation about the City of Amsterdam looking to build the mobility center of the future. And fundamentally, the mobility center of the future is really about bringing together the road users, the mass providers, the mobility providers, all of the various providers who are actually influencing mobility choices and route choices, and providing those options through the use of digital tools. So for us, the mobility center of the future is really an ambition, but what you want to see is almost this kind of harmonious ecosystem where all of these providers and digital tools come together to create this kind of future mobility ecosystem.
Fantastic. And what about you, Marek? What do you think is the next big change in smarter travel?
Well, obviously, as I work in that field, I really believe that the younger generations no longer feel the need to possess, especially cars. I think, well, in Amsterdam, it's a bicycle city, so everyone owns a bicycle. There are more bicycles than people here. So, but I really think that we stop feeling the need to possess and own cars, and we can just use cars as a means of transportation. But so they stand still for 95% of the time. So I think we can make very much more efficient use of cars we don't need to own, but we can use it only when we need it.
Thank you so much. That's a very interesting perspective. And what about you, Stuart? What do you think is the next big change in smarter travel?
Sorry, did the muting thing again. In terms of the sort of the specifics, the rest of the panelists have picked up things really well. I think it's, for me, we're changing the actual industry that's helping develop these things. So I'm not a transport person, I'm from an IT background, and I think you're seeing a lot more different people move into this particular sector, which is going to change the viewpoint on the way things are done. My team are massively different to a normal transport team. You know, there's a lot more women, people from different ethnicities, that sort of thing. And in my case, they're all a lot younger than me as well and travel around in a lot of different ways. So I think the sort of change in the approach to smarter travel is bringing in people from different sectors that will deliver it for a different kind of user base. So, you know, what everybody else has said is the kind of the outputs at the end, but I think there's a different driver coming in from those who work in the industry.
Thank you so much, Stuart, and I think that's everyone who's answered that question. Now we have a question from Owen David from Cumbria County Council, who's leading one of the Adept Smart Places Live Labs, and he says he's really interested in the political buy-in for a change of modal use, especially at a local level. So I'd like to ask the panel just to give us an overview of the political buy-in for a change of modal use. And again, I'd like to start with Rob, please.
Well, the positive thing about Spitsmeiden is people can choose themselves what they want, how they want to avoid the peak hours. We don't say you have to do this, you have to go by public transport, or you have to take the bike. It's all voluntary, and people do change their behavior. So my opinion is, don't say they have to do this from a political point. Let them choose themselves, because we can't give them orders to do something. So that's my point of view. So leave everyone its own choice.
And if we could have an answer from you too, Eric, on the political buy-in.
Yeah, it's quite different when you're looking from different goals. At my role, I was mostly involved from more an infrastructure project, and their short-time solutions are closely linked to the project. And even when the goals are more further away in time, or also more political, it's harder to get them on the agenda, but also get some funding. So I think it's important. Also, what I mentioned, it's also about a lasting effect, but it's also bring more difficult discussions on. And I'm agreeing with Rob. Pushing is most times not the best solution. It's really providing alternatives, and sometimes using a small incentive to help them, to make them the step, provide the options.
Thank you. And Eduardo, what do you think about political buy-in?
We within the municipality have actually done quite a number of things where we try to involve the citizens and residents more. And we have seen over time that these kinds of involvement of residents tend to be more of a one-way monologue, at best a two-way dialogue, which is more after the fact, where we're talking about implementation of mobility policy, where the citizens have not really necessarily been involved in the design of that policy or the effects that it might have within their neighborhoods and their communities. And so one of the things that we're trying to do, one of our ambitions, of course, with our Innovation Center for Mobility Management, is to actually create a form of a test center where we can involve researchers, create demonstrations, where we can involve knowledge institutions, but also to involve the public in defining some of these mobility solutions, and also doing it somewhat on the neutral ground of the municipality. Because, of course, many of these mobility providers have got their own forms of labs, but you run the risk, of course, that there might be their own commercial interests that are put forward within these things. So for us, it's important to actually have this kind of innovation center for mobility management, where we can have more citizen-led involvement in the mobility solutions, and also done then under the somewhat neutral territory of the municipality, where actually the citizens that we are mandated to serve are actually put front and center of the problem.
I find that really interesting, Eduardo. And in one of our live labs in the United Kingdom, we do have an innovation centre, and that's in the Kenton, Staffordshire live lab. And so moving on to you, Marek, what do you feel about the political buy-in for your initiatives?
I'm not 100% sure if I understand what you mean by a political buy-in. If you mean that it is on the political agenda that the things we do, I think CO2 reduction is a very important one as a driver for shifting from car ownership and car usage to a more less polluting kinds of transportation. So that's one thing. Also in a municipality, especially in Amsterdam, we have very dense and small narrow streets, and all the cars that are parked in the streets take up a lot of space. So if we can remove these, if we can remove the cars and we broaden the space we can actually move in, that is of course for the inhabitants of the city a very positive development. I think those two are very important for driving what we do.
Yes, that's a very good answer. So playing to different policy drivers, and those policy drivers do change over time. And Stuart, so a question for you too, please.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, I think just to reflect, there's all the local differences. So the political viewpoint is going to be tough because different things. It depends on whether you're in rural areas or you're in sort of urbanized areas where you've got alternative mode options. This requires quite a bit of political bravery to make quick change. And I think particularly the points made around by both Rob and Eduardo, Rob in terms of the fact that it's about the individual's choice, and then Eduardo's about making sure there's a voice for those people from lots of different backgrounds, will help to alter the view of things. I also think it's about not necessarily demonizing stuff. There are different nuances. So in the West Midlands, we need a more kind of all-encompassing multimodal approach because the economy of the West Midlands is very closely linked to car production. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, really. You want to balance the way people travel around, but equally take into account their livelihoods. And then you throw into the view, into the kind of the melting pot, people's view of where they live and their place around that sort of thing. So, you know, it's a tough job. I can see where the politicians come from. Gaining buy-in does require an element of bravery in terms of setting out the vision for where you need to go. And I think to a certain extent that's going to be disrupted by the fact that if it's more around the smart mobility providers having a direct contact with the end users, then perhaps it will be an opportunity to take things like the data, the information, and influence the political view in a different way than it currently is.
Yes, absolutely. And now we're going to move on to another question, and this is from Richard Smith, who I know is in Coventry, and he says there are interesting issues around GDPR and identifying individuals' journeys in the Spitsbergen. How can this approach be applied in the UK approach to GDPR and ANPR? So maybe that's a question a little bit more for Stuart.
Yeah, I was going to say it'd be a bit harsh picking Rob again first time for all of the questions. So I'm just saying this to Phil while I think about it. No, it's right. Yeah, you got different approaches to the privacy, even though the GDPR obviously does still impact the UK and will continue to impact the UK post-Brexit. So, and I think it's actually a very powerful and necessary set of regulations. I think it comes down to ultimately, there's a bit of common sense stuff around it, which is about transparency and working with the people where we're using the data, the information. So, for example, the work we're doing with the police, we've got fully documented. There is where there's the deployment of ANPR cameras, there is a full kind of process of engaging with privacy campaign groups, with local sort of groups who have different viewpoints about how they might be affected and their view. And then ultimately that's on the kind of the camera side of stuff itself and the deployment, what it's being used for, being transparent about our data sharing agreements, about the usage of the information. There's a little bit of updating has to be done where we've got existing deployed infrastructure. I think there's probably more to do around the communication side of stuff, and in particular some of the things we've got around our data processing pipelines, really demonstrating to those people who want to delve into the detail exactly how we do treat that information, who has access to it and where it goes. Helps to unlock that. It does require an element of perhaps specialist knowledge to unpick the details, but I think the principles of set out at the start will help to approach that. It might be a bit different for the mass side of things. I'm not as close to that. I'm sure some of the colleagues on the panel will pick some of that side of it up.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stuart. I'm going to move on to question 3 now, which is from Simon Forth. And he asks, is it possible, using the data gathering mechanisms we have, to identify and target drivers who have a greater propensity to change how they travel? So I'm going to go to Rob first on this one. So Simon asks, is it possible, using the data gathering mechanisms we have, to identify and target drivers who have a greater propensity to change how they travel? So a greater will to travel differently.
Well, it's difficult because you don't know who's behind the number plate when you use ANPR technology. So I don't know if you can combine some data to pick out the best ones. But what we do is we don't choose, we don't pick. We only say everyone who drives frequently during our peak hours and we make they are in our ANPR data, they get an invitation to join the project. So we don't pick out special people, and we will just see what they do, because most of the Dutch people think that if you drive 5 times a week during 5 times a week on a single highway, that those people are more likely to change their travel behavior. But that isn't true. You just have to pick out, for example, the people who drive there 2-3 times a week, because they already have their reasons why they don't travel, they don't travel 5 days a week over there. So that's why it's not easy to pick the right people. I hope
That's
it's
really
a little
interesting. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Yeah, and Eric, do you have anything to add to that?
Without ANPR technology, but what we see now is that more geofence advertising on socials is getting more options, where you're combining the location but also profiles from your target group. So there we see, when you combine several geofences but also social information, you can target your advertisements. You're not directly having the information on the individual. Well, that's hidden due to privacy laws, but you can start by target your budgets and try to select your groups. And it's a small step. And furthermore, yeah, I have to agree with Rob regarding more the ANPR use.
And Eduardo, anything from you on this question?
Not a huge amount more to add, apart from what's already been said. I think that would be the same, I would take the same point of view, which is that if I look at what we're currently doing, it's not possible to be able to, of course, single out individuals, of course. As Rob mentioned, you cannot see who is behind the number plate. But of course, the way we're utilizing our data at the moment is to be able to signify various groups. So we are able to identify, for example, taxi drivers from normal cars, of course, and we are able to identify whether those taxi drivers are traveling with a passenger or not within those cars. And so those kinds of things make big determinations in terms of how can we reduce the amount of taxi hours that are driving around searching musical chair style for that ride, and maybe put them in more of a queuing system. We can identify, of course, logistics providers and the various types of vehicles that they are. And so when you do it down to those sort of subgroup levels, then you can actually still have quite substantial insights and data to be able to make some interesting choices without necessarily needing to know the individuals behind the wheel.
That's really interesting. And anything more from you, Marek, on this question?
Well, in terms of targeting, I think we could, not on an individual level, but on a category level, target groups that are more likely to be influenced by our efforts. For example, if younger people are more likely to use an app to not travel with their own modalities, but use mobility as a service. I think there are other examples to for targeting and influencing people that are more willing to change their habits in terms of transportation.
Thank you. And Stuart, it's early days for us, but what's your feeling about this?
Yeah.
Do you think
that's one of the key learnings? Yeah, one of the key learnings from our Adept Live Lab project is looking at this information. We've accepted we're not going to go to the world of going down to an individual in terms of how they travel specifically, but we're trying to, through grouping people together, understanding some of those sectors in the granular personas, at least have a little bit more of a focused set of groupings kind of thing then, and apply some of the market kind of research techniques then. So I think that's, we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully it will work that way, because I think I'm not comfortable with going to individual levels, and I think things like mobility for service at least offer people the option there. They can opt in to get information and so on and so forth if they choose to, and I think that's quite an important thing.
That's right, and there's a lot we can learn from the Netherlands, and we are doing so today. Thank you so much. So I have a question here from Eduardo to Rob, and that is, who owns the incentivization budget, and how much do these subsidies cost?
Most times it's the highway authority in the Netherlands, and it depends on how many people you buy out. Depends on how big the area you use to and the technology you choose. So there isn't a simple answer to say how big the budget must be. But for example, we had one of our biggest projects. It's on the A12 motorway near Utrecht. It's almost 12 lanes. And there was a big project, and this budget was about 12 million euros together. So it's including the budget for the rewarding and also all the technology and all the process costs. So it was a big project. But that was one of the biggest, and we also had less budgets. For example, the A12 had, I thought, 1.4 million. But it was only 4 till 6 weeks rewarding period, so it was small. So this is the range of the costs.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's very good of you to tell us. Okay, now we have another question from Richard Smith in Coventry, and he is asking, does anyone complain about your invitation to take part based on ANPR recognition?
Yes,
so,
there are also complaints, but I think when we send 12,000 letters, it's only the tip of the mountain, the iceberg, and it's about 10 people who come up very high, and they are very mad. But it's when the Dutch people can earn money, they accept everything. So they do everything for money. So of course there are also complaints, but if you explain them that it's allowed, that we have this special national legislation, people can opt out. So if they don't want to receive letters, they can tell this to the project. So we don't send them a new letter when there's a new invitation round. So we do listen to those people, and there are more things in the world I don't like as well, but the complaints are not that big.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that too. And may I ask how you send the letters? Are they written in hard copy and sent through the postal system?
Yes, we don't have email addresses in our DVLA. They don't have email addresses, so we have to old school use letters to send them to the addresses the vehicle is registered.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. So I'd just like to invite the panel just to give us one parting thought. We're now nearing the end of this session, and any learning you want to share with us that you haven't already done so. So one last thought from you, Stuart.
So I don't know if it's a learning thing, but I still feel we're only at the very beginning of all this work. I think there's a heck of a lot of work to do, and some of these kind of projects and initiatives, it's going to take a while to come through. It's incredible strides everyone's making, but I still think there's a heck of a lot of things to do in terms of getting some of the basics right. So for us, things like core reference data around people, around road networks, these sorts of things will make things work better for everyone longer term. So hopefully the innovation built on some good basics is where I want us to get to.
Thank you, Stuart. And Marek, what is your one last thought?
Well, I totally agree with Stuart on that. We are at the beginning of like a revolution in the transportation system. I think it has the potential, MAAS especially has potential to be very successful if we all work together and see the positive things about it. Of course, we have a lot to do in terms of getting more connection between the existing means of transportations and enhancing new ones. But I think in the end, if in a few years there are more shared mobility options which are connected to the platform, and also all the existing public transportation. I'm not saying we don't need our own means of transportation anymore, but it will become close to that, I think.
That's a great insight. Thank you, Marek. And Eduardo, a last thought from you.
Yes, I think I would agree with what's already been said so far. I think there's quite a lot of things that's related to ambition and where we want to go. And at the moment, there's a lot of exploration going on in terms of how we're going to get there. And I just think, you know, if I look at the city of Amsterdam, they have made the ambition to be a 100% fully emission-free city by 2030. And most of that is coming into effect by 2025 from scooters, boats, logistics, etc., all need to be 100% emission-free by 2025. And I look at this and I think to myself, well, you know, was this done with any kind of concrete plan in mind? And the simple answer is no, not really. It was really just a sort of, well, we've got to do this, you know, it's time. We've got to move forward to this next generation. We've got to move forward to this new model, and we've got to put a stick in the sand somewhere. And so now we've been given the time, and it's a short amount of time, but we've been given the time to make those ambitions and those visions to become a reality. And I think it definitely can be done. There's no doubt about it. But it's going to take hard work, of course, and as everyone has just mentioned, the cooperation that comes with these kinds of discussions and working together with the various other municipalities, governments, institutions, etc., to make these kinds of ambitions a reality.
Thank you, Eduardo, and that's a very visionary and positive perspective. And Eric, last thought from you.
I think collaboration is still essential. We're talking about digital tools, but also think about informing important stakeholders, tell your story, and try to make them your ambassador to reach out to the consumer, to the end user, but also get some valuable feedback from them.
Thank you so much, Eric. And Rob, finally?
I think we should share our knowledge much more than we did this morning in this session. So I think we should share more.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll continue to do so. And I do hope that we'll meet in person at some point in the near future. And I wish all of you best wishes for all your adventures with your innovation center, with your app, all the things that you're coming up with and launching to the end of this year. So thank you so much. So we're in the closing moments of the webinar this morning, Going Dutch, sharing our knowledge across our organizations. And I want to introduce you to Tim Strong, who is our Transport Innovation Director from Arcadis UK. Tim has been working with us for weeks, if not months, on this agenda. And I would personally like to thank him and his team for diligently working with us on not only the use of this new technology that we're all using today, but also bringing our speakers from the Netherlands to the table and sharing your contacts with us, Tim. So it's been such a valuable experience for all of us. And I think you're going to share some reflections on the event today with the audience. And in my parting comments, I'd just like to say to everyone, thank you for joining us today. We really value your time with us today, and we will be sharing the recording of this webinar on the West Midlands Combined Authority YouTube channel in due course. So thank you. Tim.
Deborah, thank you so much. And it's been an absolute pleasure pulling this together with you and the team as well. I mean, our vision at the start was to bring together innovators from the Netherlands and the UK and share knowledge and best practice learning. And I think we've absolutely achieved that. So a big tick there. And to try and summarize the event, well, wow, where do I start? So we started with a view from the West Mids. So Anne gave us the big picture view and the context for the West Midlands and set out the breadth of the challenge and the opportunities and the vast programme of activities in play designed to create what I read on the slide, a healthier, happier, better connected and more prosperous West Midlands. And then with Stuart, we dug a bit deeper into the live lab and looked at the ways in which data analytics are being used to enhance capabilities in real-time network management. Then we flipped over to the City of Amsterdam, and Ruben gave us the sneak preview of the Innovation Centre for Mobility Management, and really setting that as a catalyst to enable new collaboration and new solutions to develop. Marek talked to us about how a mobility as a service solution has been created via public-private partnership for Amsterdam Business District as a solution to a shared problem. And then my colleagues from Arcadis Netherlands reflecting learning from sort of two parallel decade-long programs. Eric talking about the art of the possible when you plan and deliver roadworks with laser-like focus on customer experience, and talk to us about the organization shifting from being engineering asset focused to being customer user focused. And then Rob talking about learning from a series of real world experiments using cash rewards to incentivize travel behavior change. And really important for me, actually showing that some of those behavioral changes stick even after the rewards stop. And then some reflections, I guess, on all of that and the panel discussions. So while the tech and the data and the innovation and the working partnerships are as enablers has been a linking feature for all these presentations, I guess what's come out really strongly has been that they're all ultimately outcome focused programs. We talked about environmental impact and placemaking improvements and economic prosperity and growth and customer experience. And it's really heartening to feel that customers and citizens are at the heart of all of the thinking here. Some of the questions we talked about, how can we get to know and understand the customers better? And then having done so, how can we deliver services that they need? And at the same time, influence their choices. And Eduardo in the panel session talked about including citizens in co-creation activities. We've grasped for the problem. How can you upgrade transport infrastructure, which is needed to support growth, and at the same time keep your customers and citizens moving and informed? And then I guess it couldn't be a webinar at the moment without us reflecting on how the COVID crisis has changed the dynamics in so many fundamental ways. And yet the backbone of the projects and the schemes we've talked about, the tech and the data and the customer relationships, have enabled us all to adapt and plan and iterate the solutions in a way that perhaps wouldn't have been possible even 5 years ago. And finally, coming back to the start, I think we've seen and we've heard there's a great appetite for learning and sharing knowledge, and that brings us back full circle really to the rationale for the webinar. And that includes an invite for Deborah and the team to go visit the Amsterdam Innovation Centre when it's safe to do so. So look, we're gonna post a video of the event and we're going to try and summarise and share a write-up of it for you as well. So please all look out for that. And then to end with some thank yous. Thank you, Deborah, Lewis, Amy, and the whole Transport for West Midlands team for all your help in planning, organising and running the event. Thanks again to our speakers and panelists from the West Mids, from the City of Amsterdam, and from Arcadis Netherlands. And finally, thank you to all of you that have tuned in, that have listened, that have posted questions. And you know, to end with a quote from Stuart, I think we all realise that we are on a journey. It's the start of a journey, and we look forward to moving forward with all of you. So with that, I wish you a very happy Thursday, and thanks from me and from all of us.